Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
Hello. Thanks for joining us on Mission Evolution. We're coming to you on X-Zone TV and Simul TV from our broadcast studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, bringing the latest evolutionary information from today's leading experts. This hour, we'll look at death, dying, and beyond. Death. It happens to all of us. Yet, do we really have any idea what it is? What happens when we die? Do we go somewhere or simply cease to exist? Is there a heaven and a hell? Are there really spirits of the dead walking among us? With us this hour to consider these questions is Salicrow. She's the author of Spirit Speaker, A Medium's Guide to Death and Dying, and a natural psychic medium who weaves the traditions of her Irish Traveler and Blackfoot heritage with modern magical techniques. For more than 30 years, Salicrow has worked as a spirit channel, seer, and intuitive healer, offering readings and teaching workshops throughout the United States and internationally. Her website, salicrow.com. Salicrow, thanks for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
So your bio says that you are a natural psychic medium. Do you have any formal training?
I have training from Spirit. My formal training would have began when I was a small child. My great-grandmother was somebody who people went to see. And I've been being trained in one form or another since I was, about 3 years old.
Okay. So what is a natural psychic medium?
The word natural to me refers to a person who has ability and experiences without training, which means that we can train ourselves to become more sensitive to spirit, but there are those of us who, regardless of whether we want to have that experience or not, are going to have it. So I've been having experiences with spirit since I can remember. I don't actually have a part of my life where I don't remember spirit being part of it.
So does it run in your family? You mentioned your grandmother.
Yes. My great grandmother was my first teacher, and both of her parents had gifts. So, and one of my sisters is a psychic. My daughter is a psychic. We have a lot of psychics in our family. And that's kind of what I refer to by natural, is that this is something that we just accept as being part of our lives.
So would you please define spirit as we'll be working with it today?
Sure. The spirit I'm talking about is the spirits, particularly of the beloved dead, which are our family, friends, loved ones, and ancestors. I do answer some questions about, troubled spirits for people in my personal practice, but this book was designed for everyday people. I have been a medium for many years. And my clients are, doctors, nurses, teachers, waitresses. They're everyday people who are mourning and wanting to have a deeper connection with spirit. And the spirit they're looking for are their personal spirits, those beloved dead.
So when you're working with the beloved dead, if you will, do you get permission from, firstly, the person that is asked you or that's here present, as well as the spirit of the dead?
Sure. Yes, absolutely. I will not do spirit communication without the living person being the one that comes to me. So the way that I was raised, I don't think it's right to go up to somebody on the street and tell them that you see their dead people, because you don't know whether that person is ready for that information or not. And so for me, I have really strong morals and ethics about that. And when it comes to the spirit, it's an invitation. The living loved ones come to see me for an appointment to communicate with their dead. And while I guarantee that somebody will come through for everybody, I don't guarantee who comes through. But in truth, I've never really had a spirit that didn't want to come through when I asked. So I think of it almost like placing a phone call that we join together, and I literally ask the people, who are you most looking for? I don't need details of their death or their life, just who are you looking for? And then I reach out and ask that spirit if they'd like to join us. And if they do, then the communication begins. But it is always a permission thing.
Have you ever had it happen the other way where some spirit is knocking on your door,
Yes.
and saying, "I want to talk to, I want to talk to"?
Yeah, many times. Personally, yes, but even for other people. And they'll find their way in. So when I've had psychic abilities my whole life. I've been working, doing divination, precognitive work since I was 18, and I'm 52. And I started doing spirit communication publicly when I was 30, after having a major opening to spirit. That my first book, Jump Girl, The Initiation and Art of a Spirit Speaker, was about my opening and my growing up psychic. So when I had this opening, in the beginning of it, and I was still putting my boundaries in, I did have a spirit come through to me, kept waking me up in the middle of the night. He told me that he had been a truck driver, and that he had a heart attack, and that he drove his truck into water. So because of his heart attack, and he never made it home. And he really wanted me to call his wife. He told me where she lived, all this stuff. And I'm like, I am not calling somebody to say, hey, is your husband dead? And if so,
I'm talking to him.
Right. I don't even know you. You don't know me. And so I told him that wasn't how I worked, and that he'd have to find a different way. And about 3 years later, I had a couple come to see me. The man had lost his best friend. And I started doing this, spirit communication session. And I realized that the best friend of the man who'd come to see me was the man who had had the heart attack and drove into the water. So I was able to tell him, does his wife live in this town? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, well, this man came to me 3 years ago. And so spirits are persistent. They will often find their way back to what they want to talk about or to get through. But sometimes you have to give them the heads up that maybe the living isn't ready to just have a stranger call them and tell them.
So there's lots of different kinds of spirits,
Yes.
from hauntings to possessions to disembodied spirits that haven't crossed yet, to ones that have crossed
Elemental
and come back,
spirits,
the ones
nature
that come back as
spirits.
helpers. How can you tell who you're talking to? I mean, just because they're dead doesn't mean they're smart, right? Don't they have
Right.
to have crossed and then come back to qualify as a helping spirit?
Well, they have to know that they're dead and have processed through the, initial piece of dying and review of their life before they're going to really be able to be a helping spirit. And the people who end up in positions of being helping spirits really have to deal with the emotional damage that might have happened during their life that they never dealt with before they can take on that role.
Is
Um,
that crossing? Is that the life review, like the
yes.
Tibetans call the bardo? Maybe the Catholics call
Yes.
it
Yep.
purgatory.
Yes,
Okay, and
exactly.
what causes that review?
I think that we need to recognize, because life is about learning. We're here to have experiences, and the review is something that helps us to see where maybe we made bad decisions in our life, or maybe what actually caused our death. Because most people, when they come through, will know, if they died. I once had a guy who he had died, and he had cancer, lung cancer, and his family kept giving him a hard time because he was a smoker, and they believe that's what caused it. But when he died, one of the things he came through to say was that he did not die from the smoking was not what caused his lung cancer, is that he had worked doing road construction most of his life, and it was the exposure to the tar and all of the chemicals that come with working with things like asphalt and stuff like that. So they're very that review helps us to see, what we did wrong or what was done to us, helps us to see the perspective of what the whole story is.
So, as a psychic medium, how can you tell the processed level of the spirit that you're speaking with. When, in other words, can you trust what they're saying? How can you tell if this person is processed, or maybe they're still coming from where they did when they were alive?
Yeah. First of all, our emotions get turned down when we die. So most spirits are going to have a little bit of an adjustment to their emotional level, their personality. I do work with a spirit guide who watches my back on the other side. I refer to them as a doorman because I used to own a bar. So, you have a doorman lets you know who can come in, who can't. They'll say, you can come in, I'll pass a message for you, or you need to go away. So I do rely on spirits as well for that. And in my own
Now,
personal,
have
go
these
ahead.
spirits ever been alive, or are these?
Yes, some of my spirits have been yes, the spirits I work with in this have been alive. And some of them I've actually known in life. And they work kind of like, I think of it as like crowd control and helping me to have a clear view. But having been a psychic, I was working, doing precognitive work from the time I was 18. I started doing spirit communication publicly at 30 after a major opening. My first book had a huge amount of information on that process of opening. And part of that was actually being trained by spirits. I had a group of 5 spirits that were working with me and really making sure that I was that I was trusting my own intuition, that I was feeling for. And I want proof. When spirit comes through to me, I don't let them just say things like, oh, they loved you so much. And they have to give me unique things, and when I talk about unique, one of the more interesting ones I had was, and this was in the beginning of my working, is a spirit. I had already given them a lot of information. He was a grandfather and father. And he kept showing me a giant rooster. And I was like, at first I was like, I don't know if I can say this to these people because I have no idea why he's showing me this. But I did. I said, he keeps showing me a giant rooster and I don't really know what it's about. And they started laughing because he actually had a giant rooster statue in his yard. So
interesting.
when I say I often want spirit to give me very unusual or unique things that make it so that the person I'm communicating with that's alive knows without a doubt that this is their loved one.
Well, it's time for us to take a station break. Salicrow and I will return very shortly, so don't go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Hello again. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us this hour discussing death, dying, and beyond is Salicrow. Her website, salicrow.com. Sally, when a person has lost loved ones, this is just for our people that don't necessarily have psychic gifts.
Mm-hmm.
How can they tell someone is trying to talk to them in order to contact you to help?
Well, there's a lot of ways that spirit reaches out for communication. And a lot of it is for most people who are not psychically sensitive, they may feel the person around them. They may have had dreams of them. They might find themselves having a kind of like a phantom smell, because our sense of smell, there's so many ways they use to communicate with us, even when we're not that psychically sensitive. But the biggest thing that they do is they direct their energy at us. So when we think of like people who say, I heard this song on the radio and I knew it was my sister. And what I tell people is that, your spirit did not make the DJ play that song. Instead, what happened is when you were listening to that song and you were feeling them, they pushed their energy at you. And that means that they wanted you to feel their presence at the same time that song was playing, because the familiarity would make it so that you were more likely to receive that information. But they do the same thing with our dreams. We wake up if we've had a dream and maybe we had a visitation in our dream and we're not sure if it's a visitation or just our subconscious mind. And what I tell people is the difference is that with a visitation, there is a moment when we realize the person is dead. like we have this conscious moment in the dream where we're like, wait a minute, you're dead. And part of our brain kind of comes awake at that moment. And those dreams, the ones that stick with you all day or, even throughout the week or month, those are the dreams that are visitation. So there's many ways, Gwilda, and I do go into that in some detail in Spirit Speaker.
So another question that I'm sure a lot of the audience is wondering is, if you can be approached by people that have crossed or that are dead and have your best interest at heart, can you also be approached by somebody that's dead but hasn't crossed and is angry or wants another body to be in?
Well, technically you can, but I like to equate it to life. In the living, most of the people we're going to run into are going to be good. Okay. But we also know that there are living people who aren't, and that there is always a risk. And so I suppose you could say the same thing about the dead, is that the majority of the spirits that you're going to come in contact with are going to be loving spirits. And that often if it's a, negative entity or spirit, there are going to be some things that are more likely attached to that. One, the person that is having the experience is probably psychically sensitive, because people who are psychically sensitive give off more luminosity or energy. And so spirit is more naturally attracted to it. That's why, like, you can have a haunted house, and if there's no one living in the house who has natural ability as a medium, which means they're going to have experiences regardless of whether they're trained or not, then nothing will happen. But if you move one person into that space that has natural ability as a medium, everybody in the house can feel something, because the medium is actually like a battery. So going back to, working, if we are, opening up or even wanting to communicate with our own beloved dead, those beloved dead of ours are also going to be protective of us. So I often tell people that when they are becoming psychically sensitive or they are opening up, that they should really ask a relative of theirs who they trust, who's passed, or a loved one, to work with them, to kind of look out for them. But really, the majority of people are not going to run into evil spirits unless they're in a place where that is likely to happen. Just like as human people living, our likelihood of being assaulted is going to be higher if we go into a more dangerous area. But the average person is not going to run that risk very much.
So have you ever worked with paranormal investigators, and what's your take on looking for spirits in haunted places?
I do not work with paranormal investigators, not because I personally have anything against them as people. For me, it's that I believe that if a place is really haunted, that means that spirits are suffering. And I personally will never be somebody who does like a haunted house tour or, any kind of thing like that, because my own ethics would lead me to want to cross those spirits over, not to keep bringing people back so that they can have some entertainment.
And there goes the appeal,
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. I wouldn't be very good at it, because I'd be crossing them over and they'd be like, now we don't have a show. So for me, it's not my thing.
So can you cross a person over without their permission?
Yes, you can, technically.
Do you cross people over without their permission?
Do I cross people over? I'm a negotiator. So I have done haunted house work before. What I find, first of all, the first question I ask people if they're having activity in their house is whether there's somebody with a mental illness or a teenager living in the home. And the reason why is that a lot of activity is actually more poltergeist activity created by people who cannot express themselves properly, and their energy being very chaotic, and basically they're having telekinetic response from their own emotions. So once that is answered, when I go, my first goal is to help the living and the dead to cohabitate in the space, to find out whether the dead is stuck, like they don't know how to cross over, and to help the family, the living family, create, rules of engagement. I have crossed spirit over before when that didn't work, and I had to go back because the spirit refused to behave itself. And I have never had to really force it. I usually find that once you call in and ask the ancestors of that spirit to come in, that they usually find that they're okay to go. But I have done some unusual spirit activity work for sure.
Have you seen a real, honest to goodness possession?
I think that possession I have seen, because I also do healing work. So I think not full on possession like what you see in The Exorcist or something like that, but people who have had major traumas in their lives will often have part of their soul kind of like left in that spot. In shamanism, they refer to it as, having to have soul retrieval to bring these pieces back. The problem is that if somebody has had that kind of trauma that's unprocessed, that they might be standing or partially out of their body, is that it creates a space for something else to come in. Sometimes that is simply a thought form attachment, which means that it's a repetitive thought being that is, created by that trauma. Sometimes I have experienced where it was an actual being attached to somebody. And yes, I have done that work, but that's not where my specialty lies. I get those kind of things because I tell people, like, I've been doing this for 30 years. A lot of people know me. So if there is a real problem that has anything to do with anything psychic, I get called. But most of my work is as a healer, both in my, like, I've worked out of counseling offices. Like, they've asked me to come have my office there. I have an office in a downtown space. My town advertises things I'm doing because I'm mostly a healer. I work with people with their problems and I help people who are grieving. So I tell people my role in spirit communication is as a healer. So
So
helping people to make peace.
that sounds like pretty close to counseling. Do you have any
It
training in
is.
counseling?
I have no official training in counseling, but I have, like I said, I actually, during the pandemic, I worked out of a counselor's building, and it was the wellness center I was in closed during the pandemic. And the counselors called me and asked me to come work out of their space because that's the work that I do. I have a deep connection with a lot of people and see things that they're not even ready to talk about or know how to talk about. So that helps me. Also, I work with people with PTSD, people who have deep wounding, and often when I work with people around spirit communication, when there's, if a person has lost a child or had a very serious death, those people might end up working with me in my role as a healer, because I'm also a Reiki master in 6 schools of Reiki. I've done vocal toning sound healing for over 20 years. So, and I teach classes. Like, I'm a professional psychic.
So do you have, when you're doing things that start oozing over into the therapy and counseling role, do you have trained therapists that you refer to?
I do, but more often than not, trained therapists refer people to me. So
Okay.
like, I just don't do long-term work. So I tell people, like, so I do refer people to therapists when they need to work with somebody. I have psychiatrists who have come to take classes with me privately. They don't always want to take it in a large group because they have a reputation, but I study this stuff on my own, but I've never gone to school for it. But yeah, more often counselors, therapists are sending people to me than I am sending them to a therapist.
So does that put you at risk of practicing without a license?
No, because the state of Vermont, I don't think it puts me at risk for it because I'm not claiming to be a therapist. I'm claiming to be a psychic. I tell people things that are true that they don't, without them telling me. When somebody sits down with a psychic reading with me, they don't even have to tell me their name. They can just sit down and I'm just going to start telling them things. And so, but in the state of Vermont that I live in, you can be a therapist that's unlicensed. It's a legal thing in this state, for one. But I don't claim to be a therapist. And I do refer people who need long-term care to go to therapists. But more often than not, therapists send people to me.
Well, it's certainly a remote area, even though everybody deals with death.
Hmm.
Not too many people work with it, and
Yeah.
so the guidelines are kind of foggy in there,
Yeah.
depending on where you're living and what the rules are. So I can certainly
Hmm.
understand that. So we're just about to have to go into another station
Okay.
break. When we get back, I'd really like to talk about the different kinds of spirits there are and how you interface with each. If you're up for
Okay.
that, Sally Crow and I will be right back to continue our discussion. So stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Hi there. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. Our guest this hour is Sally Crow. Her website, salicrow.com. Sally Crow, we were talking just before the break about taking a look at what different kinds of spirits there are and any guidelines that you can give us of how to interface or not interface if we shouldn't.
Well, most people are interested, like I said, in communicating with their beloved dead, which are human dead spirits, and they are spirits of other humans. But my second book, The Path of Elemental Witchcraft, was actually about nature spirits and elemental beings. So, telling you the average person, in my opinion, is really going to be better off looking to have communication with their own ancestors and their own beloved dead, because that's something we've done as human beings throughout history. This is a very common thing that, some cultures still interact with their dead in that way. More people are having experiences with fae beings or elemental beings, fairies, if they want to call them that. Is that kind of what you're asking me about, different kinds of spirits? Or
You bet. But one question I did have, you keep talking about the beloved dead. What about if you have a relative that's not so beloved and they're
yeah,
dead?
they're still your ancestors. You might want to bring that person. Like, I have done that. I've actually done a lot of work with families who want to have closure with spirits who, weren't that beloved, as you said. And, that's twofold. One, it's up to the spirit whether they want to show up for that session. And it also is, are they ready for it? So, you know, I think that if you really have a lot of problems with somebody who's crossed over into spirit, you're going to want to make sure that you're working with a really skilled medium, because what happens when we die is our emotions get turned down. So if we imagine that
What do
in
you mean?
life,
I'm sorry. What do you mean by that?
okay, in life, if we imagine our emotions on a volume dial of 0 to 10, most people go through life with their emotions set about a 3 or a 4. When we die, when we have anxiety, depression, we're more like an 8 or a 9, which means that we're almost drowning in our emotions because it's so loud or all encompassing. And when we die, our emotions get turned down to about a 2. So it makes it so that we can analytically process things, which is how we review our life. And it's easier that way because we're able to see all perspectives, because we're not just stuck in our own emotions. The problem with working with a medium is that a medium turns the volume back up again. So you have to know that if you're going to, need to have some closure around family member or somebody who hurt you, and you think you're ready for it, you have to understand that the emotions are going to be high, and that the medium is going to have to be skilled enough to be able to handle that. A lot of mediums aren't going to want to do that work.
So,
Okay.
so when you talk about, you do healing work.
Hmm.
Do you heal the dead as well as the living?
I have worked on healing the dead, and I actually have advice for people in the book on how they can, still help to heal their beloved dead. And a lot of it is, like the same things, healing ourselves, processing the wounds that are around their death and around our experience with them helps them to heal. I think it's important that we still pray for our dead, or we still put our intention into them being well. But really, yes, I have done work with dead who need healing.
What about getting lost? Okay. Sometimes people are I've been in contact with people when they're in the death process that are terrified of death because they don't believe there's anything afterwards, and cling to life, and sometimes probably cling to this reality rather than doing
Right.
the walk through their
Yep.
history or the life review. What goes on there?
Well, I think that, when we don't have any belief system, we get really scared at the end of life. So people who might be atheists, they might think that they're okay with believing that nothing exists. But when death still comes, that's really scary when you think you're just going into oblivion. And I think that religious dogma can also cause fear for people. So people definitely can get afraid and can get themselves stuck. But on average, what happens for most people is they are met by a family member. And it might, even if you're adopted or you have a life that you think you got nobody, there is still some ancestor that is likely to come for you after you've crossed. So most people don't get stuck.
Do people sorry, triggered another one for me here.
Yeah.
Do when you're in, at the, a person's deathbed, do the spirits from the other side start coming at that point before the
Yes.
person's even crossed? And
Yes.
are the people in the room with the dying aware of that?
Yes. So when we are in what I refer to as the gray, so the gray is a period in which a person is actively dying and cannot get better. They may also be in the gray for a while after they die. In the case of people who get lost, they can be stuck in that. They're in that transition, the bardo, however you want to call it, limbo. You can kind of be in limbo before you already die. So especially with long deaths, with people who have long-term illness, or they're dying, that space that they're in creates a more of a opening for spirit to come through more clearly. Okay.
Because they're walking with one foot in each reality.
Yes, exactly. And so often the dead will experience their loved ones coming to visit them shortly before they die. And people who work in death doulas, hospice nurses, families who are tending their loved ones when they are dying, also have more experiences with spirit contact than regularly.
How about someone thinking really strongly about the dying person, but they're alive too? Can they show up as well?
Yes. When we're dead, we're not limited by time and space. We can, be visiting somebody in California and then visiting somebody in Vermont in a split second. And time is not the same. It's 40 years when you're dead is not the same as 40 years when you're alive. And then, so we are able to, have those more situations happen one right on top of each other. And I'm sorry, what was the question? I think I got a little confused there.
Oh, now you have to backtrack me. I was asking if a person is thinking very strongly about the person that's in the death process, but they're not in the area.
Yes.
Can they show up in spirit?
Yeah. So that's kind of why I was talking about the space. Yeah. As soon as we start thinking, that's how, I've been doing spirit communication for a long time. And so now I literally think of it like a phone call. I think heavily and speak heavily, asking for the dead that I'm looking for to come through. This is something with our own beloved dead that we can do. It's like they hear us, they feel us thinking about them. And it is, in many ways, is kind of like they're getting a phone call. If they are available, which most of the time they are, then they are going to come to us.
Okay,
and we
so
may feel them.
I was actually thinking the other direction, where someone that's alive comes to the dying person, and people in the room are able to recognize the person that's alive along with the spirits of the beloved dead.
Yes. So they're able to, the dead are able to recognize the living as well. Yes. There is a recognition that happens.
So, what about a person that has a very sudden death and, like in the Sixth Sense movie, doesn't know they're dead?
Very often what happens is that somebody comes for that spirit. So that can happen when we've had a really sudden death, but not most of the time. A lot of sudden deaths, they realize, but sometimes they'll be out of their body. Like older souls will sometimes hop out of their body as soon as an accident happens, even though they're going to die at a hospital later.
I don't want to be around for that, right?
Right. I'm just going to I don't have to be in the pain. But one of the other things that I find is that, we have people who come for us. So it could be one of the guides that I had for many years, he in life died from malaria and he had been delusional. So when he, because he was in and out of consciousness, and when he first crossed over, he told me he didn't know he was dead until his grandfather came to get him. So most of the times what happens is that we might have a very short stint of not knowing that we've crossed over. But if that's the case, almost always we have somebody come to get us. If there are the rare cases where, like you said, people get lost, but that's usually because they were really struggling mentally at the time of their passing. It's more unusual than not. And that's why there are people like mediums who have to sometimes help people to cross when they get stuck in that space.
When you are helping someone to cross, do you take them to the gate? Do you go into spirit and take them to the gate?
I usually, if they're already dead, or are they actively dying? Because I've also helped people to cross who are actively dying. So which are you referring?
Actively dying.
When somebody is actively dying, the role that I usually play is I usually come in and I ask them why. First of all, I ask them if they're conscious, why they're stuck. What are you still here for? What needs to be talked about? What needs to be looked at? Because actually, more often than not, people get stuck with unprocessed things. But if a person is unconscious and I'm helping them to pass, I go through and I am connecting to them mentally through my mind, telepathically, looking to see if there's something that might be holding them in place. But I also go through, and I talk about this in the book, and I do things like, we have another storm coming in, so hopefully we don't lose contact. I go through and I check where their body is holding, because I talk about this in the book, that there's places that we get locked in, our ankles, our hips, our, any joints we can get stuck, our heart. Those are places that we might have a harder time letting go. So the first thing I actually do is I'm going in and I'm energetically helping them. And I give instructions for families how to do this.
Yeah. We're just about out of time this segment, but what do you mean stuck to your ankle?
Well, we get stuck. It's not really that we're stuck to our ankle, but the places of movement, our body sometimes has a harder time letting go. Like a lot of people who have out of body experiences, for example, may find that they sit up in their body, but they never actually leave their body because they're stuck in their hips. The places where we have movement, lots of movement, are often places where our spirit kind of gets anchored.
Oh, okay. Okay. Makes sense. Well, it is time for that station break. Please stay with us as Salicrow and I continue to explore death and spirits of the dead. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Welcome back. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. This hour, our guest is Salicrow. Her website, salicrow.com. Salicrow, when we're considering speaking with the dead, particularly if a person isn't necessarily trained but is starting to get inklings that there's someone around, what are the guidelines there? Is there any danger?
Well, I tell them that they should first start by trying to communicate with spirits that they know, not, random spirits in a graveyard or like people who decide they're going to go to the haunted house. That's just stupid. Okay. And what I usually tell them is that they should start by, again, finding a spirit that is somebody they feel safe with in life, and make that really where their contact is kind of originating from. I do not recommend that people who are untrained go start their spirit communication process in a haunted house or in a place that might be more dangerous. Sticking with our own family spirits is one of the better moves to do, and do that through the sacredness of creating an altar, which I do talk about in the book, Spirit Speaker.
What danger? What are you talking about danger?
Mostly the danger is that the spirit might be telling you things that aren't true. That's probably the most common, is that, I tell people, like, if it doesn't sound right, chances are it's not. And if it doesn't sound like your relative, it's not, and any spirit that is telling you anything negative about yourself, or negative, that is harmful to yourself or others, you should just stop contact with immediately.
Are there
Okay.
spirits that have not been incarnate that are of the evil persuasion, if you will?
Yes, but most people don't have those problems, like, these are things that are blown out of proportion by Hollywood, and they do happen, but it's also true that, violent crimes happen to the living, but that is also sensationalized. And we know that, media blows it out of proportion and makes us live in a place of fear around it. The same thing happens with spirit contact. I do not think that Ouija boards should be sold as toys because a person is not educated in how to take care of themselves. And I do not think that we should make light of such things. But I think that for the most part, there is more sensationalization of the things to fear than there is actually things to fear.
Within that, where do these things come from that haven't been human, haven't been incarnate?
Some of them are created by thought. There's many cultures that believe in thought forms becoming consciousness. That's the most common that people actually experience. Like when people have to go and work with somebody who does shamanic healing because they have an attachment, 90% of the time that attachment is a thought form attachment. And, a thought form attachment can happen on a small form, and that doesn't mean that they're not real. Okay. So like quantum physics talks about this, that what we think like that most people are more, they're going to have more of a reaction to a chemical response. So for example, if you're a serious overeater, you aren't really addicted to potato chips. You're addicted to the shame that you give yourself after eating the bag of potato chips. That is a chemical that your body has gotten used to receiving, even though it's not good. Okay. The same thing happens for us in many ways, So like if we could have had a trauma in our life and we create a thought form thing that requires things out of us. Like maybe it tells you that, maybe you have a thought form that tells you you're stupid all the time. And it's not really your voice, but you hear that and you believe that about yourself. And there's a chemical response that comes with that. That makes that thing real because it craves a response from you. It has a need for it. Most things that people would qualify as having attachments or personal demons are going to be thought form attachments.
Okay,
There
well,
are beings from other dimensions for sure, but those are far more rare.
We'll get back to the other dimensions in just a second, but the thought forms.
Mhm.
Okay, the thought form. So say we're all together and we're in a house and we're deciding it's haunted and we're looking for that ghost. Can we actually create the ghost through our thought forms?
No, you're more likely to call something in if there's a whole bunch of people that is, trying to connect with somebody. You may not call in who you're thinking about calling in. So I do recommend to people that if you really are thinking about getting involved in spirit communication, that you do educate yourself. That's why it shouldn't be that you're learning how to communicate with spirits through a Ouija board that you bought at Walmart and the toy department, because you're not going to take it seriously. You're not going to think about creating protection for yourself. You're not going to think, and I create protection every single time I do a seance. Every single time. My clients, when they come to me, I don't know what kind of spirits they have with them. So the first thing that I do is I take a moment and I have everybody close their eyes and we take a few deep breaths and we let go of our everyday worries. And in that time, I am spreading out a circle of intention around myself of protection. I call in my guides, particularly the guide I work with, before I welcome other people's spirits into my space. Not because I think I'm going to be haunted, but because I take all precautions.
So when you're talking about seance, is that the environment you set around when you're trying to
Yeah.
speak with the dead on
So
behalf of
the
someone
word
else?
seance means to sit in respect with spirit. So it's really, I started using that word many years ago. I really debated about it, but I really think that part of my own personal mission is to reclaim words that have been misused, that modern culture, horror movies, and Scooby-Doo. I love Scooby-Doo, but let's face it, it has really distorted a lot of things that happen. And so the word seance was one that I chose to bring back. And it means to sit with spirit in a sacred space and choose contact.
So let's back up a little bit and go to the other dimensional spirits.
Mm-hmm.
What are those and what are the other dimensions?
I don't know all the dimensions. I didn't get a handbook, but I do recognize that there are, just like in shamanism, there's the upper world and the lower world. I also believe that, I kind of talk about the dimensional realms as colored folders that you get to put folders in, the clear ones. Some are red, some are pink, some are blue. Some are green. I think of nature spirits as being in the green. So they're in a different dimension. Elemental fire spirits are going to be in a different dimension than elemental water spirits. The beloved dead are going to be in a different dimension. Angelic beings are going to be in a different dimension. What we think of as demonic beings are going to be in a different dimension. And to be quite honest, most people are not going to have contacts with demonic beings unless you're trying to, or the other ways that it can happen is people who are doing medicine journeys irresponsibly open themselves up to that. And people who have been raised in highly restrictive dogmatic religions are also more likely, when they open up psychically, to call negative spirits to themselves because they believe it's going to happen, because their religion told them it would happen. So they have more fear around it. And, one of the things that my grandmother taught me at a young age was that when it came to working with spirit, that fear was the soul killer, that you give your power away when you believe you have no power.
Got it. So it's about that time in the show that I have to ask you, Salicrow, what is your mission?
My mission is to change the world. And I don't believe that I'm the only person to do so. But if people ask me that question, it's funny because this is one of my questions that I always have. If they ask me that question, I always answer it honestly. I don't think I'm going to do it by myself. But if you ask me, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to change the world. I'm helping wanting people to have a more natural relationship with psychic experiences, with the idea that the spirit realm is real, because we are going through psychic evolution and people are really struggling because they're not understanding these experiences that they're having. So my mission is to help them understand that a little bit and to bring peace. I really think of myself as my main role as being a healer.
So you brought up the next question I had for you is, talk to me about psychic evolution. What do you mean by psychic evolution?
So psychic evolution, I've been working psychically with the public for over 30 years. And when I first started doing this, I found that if I read for, 10 people, 1 or 2 people would be having psychic experiences. Now, if I read for 10 people, out of that 10 people, 8 or 9 people are having psychic experiences. I watched it grow, particularly 2011. It started, I believe it was more triggered around the winter solstice of 2012 that had been connected into the center of the galaxy and our solstice sun's alignment. And I started really seeing this grow continuously. In 2019, right before the pandemic, that whole year was pretty much spent with everyday people, who never thought about psychic stuff, coming to see me because they thought that there was something wrong with them, or they were going crazy because they were so emotional. They were picking up other people's thoughts and emotions, and they didn't know what to do with it. And in 2020, I took part in writing an anthology that was called The Corona Transmissions. And it was a compilation of work between astrologers and psychics and thinkers about what we thought was happening. And one of the things that we almost all touched on was this change in consciousness. Some people call it awakening, some people call it enlightenment, but I call it psychic evolution because I think it's natural to be, first of all, supernatural is still natural. It's just supersized. Supersized fries are still fries. They're just more than, right? So supernatural is just more than the average information being brought in, or the more than the average experience. And so psychic evolution has to do with making this something that's natural instead of something that sounds kind of flighty, because I don't mind the word awakening, but if you're really, I have a lot of everyday people who are my clients, so I try to keep things really base and practical and not to use terminology that they might not understand.
Well, unfortunately, Salicrow, we are out of time. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Our guest this hour has been Salicrow, a psychic medium and the author of Spirit Speaker, A Medium's Guide to Death and Dying. Her website, salicrow.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to visit past archived episodes, you can always visit us at www.missionevolution.org. But please be sure to join us right here next time as this mission continues, bringing information, resources, and support to an evolving world.